Hey Twisters, and welcome to my Pacific Division preview for the 2022-23 NHL season. So the way that we're structuring our previews here, first of all, we'll take a look at last year's division standings, playoff teams, and the overall outcome for teams in the Pacific. Second, we'll look at the offseason additions and subtractions to the division at large. Then we'll go team by team as I point out the biggest storylines, strengths, and weaknesses to be aware of. And then I'll conclude with my overall outlook on the division. Now comment down below, guys, what are your Pacific Division standings? Which teams make the playoffs out of this division? I polled the community earlier in our community tab, and you guys thought that the Oilers will be the division champion in 2023 and by a fairly sizable margin. Make sure if you haven't already, watch my other division previews. I've got all three other divisions covered, and become a member. I just uploaded my Czech Extra Liga logo rankings for our MVP members. So if you like exclusive content, that sounds pretty good, eh? Check out our Twisted Wrister Hockey memberships. Okay, here we go. Let's get started. Skadoosh that like, and we're going to start with our Pacific Division standings. Okay, so Calgary won the division last year with 111 points. They were eliminated in the second round by the team that finished right behind them, the Edmonton Oilers, 104 points. They went to the conference final, but they were swept by the Colorado Avalanche. The LA Kings had a surprising season with 99 points. They lost in the first round to the Oilers in 7 games. And then the rest of these teams did not qualify. The Vegas Golden Knights with 94 points, just a little bit outside the picture. Same with the Vancouver Canucks at 92 points. And then there's a pretty big gap between them and the last 3 teams here. The San Jose Sharks with 77, the Ducks right behind them with 76, and the Kraken in their first NHL season only mustered 60 points. Let's take a look at the biggest offseason changes to this division. So you'll see here that the Pacific Division did get noticeably stronger in the offseason. So coming over to the Calgary Flames in that monster trade, you have Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, and then they added Nazem Kadri from the Avalanche in free agency. The Kings traded for Kevin Fiala with the Minnesota Wild. The Edmonton Oilers upgraded their starting goaltending with Jack Campbell coming over from the Maple Leafs in free agency. The Ducks also added some veterans, including defenseman John Klingberg, and also into the middle six, you have Ryan Strome and Frank Vetrano. Andrei Burakovsky and Oliver Bjorkstrand joined the Kraken, both of whom came off great seasons of their own. Phil Kessel also signed from the Arizona Coyotes with the Vegas Golden Knights. And you do still have some big names leaving this division, but I still think it got stronger. Johnny Gaudreau, one of the biggest names here, leaving in free agency to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Matthew Tkachuk being the piece on the other side of that Huberdeau and Weegar trade. Now he's playing with the Panthers. Max Pacioretty traded from the Golden Knights to the Carolina Hurricanes, and Brent Burns also traded to the Hurricanes from the San Jose Sharks. And really, there weren't that many other big notable names leaving the division, but I'll recap a few of them here. So Andreas Athanasiou leaves the LA Kings for the Chicago Blackhawks. Rudolfs Balcers is bought out by the Sharks and ends up signing with the Florida Panthers. Mike Smith is technically still an Oiler, but he's on IR and he's projected to miss this season and hang him up. So I decided to include him on this list. And Yaroslav Halak leaves the Vancouver Canucks for the New York Rangers. All right, now let's go team by team, examining the biggest storylines, some players to look out for, team strengths, and weaknesses. So we're going to get started with the Seattle Kraken. Okay, so the Kraken were just 23-49 in regulation. They were tied for 28th in goals for, 24th in goals against, 29th on the power play, and tied for 30th on the penalty kill. So top storylines for the Seattle Kraken, they signed Cup winner Andrei Burakovsky from the Avalanche, coming off a career-high 22 goals and 39 assists. They also traded for Oliver Bjorkstrand. They made that trade with Columbus. He had 28 goals and 29 assists for them last year. They have a lot of kind of middle six talent on their team. They don't really have a top line per se. However, hopefully they have a step forward this upcoming season from Matty Beniers. So this guy was the number 2 overall pick in 2021. He played 10 games with Seattle this past season and scored 3 goals and 6 assists. So maybe their top centerman. Look for a bounce back in net. So that's one reason why the Kraken weren't that good. It wasn't that the defense was so bad. It was really the goaltending. So we saw sizable drop-offs for both Chris Driedger and Philip Grubauer. Grubauer, just 2 seasons ago, was 3rd for Vezina voting with the Avalanche, and it wasn't just the defense in front of him, in my opinion. 55 games with Seattle last year, just an .889 save percentage, and a 3.16 goals against average, and 2 shutouts. As for Driedger, he's going to start the season on IR. Eventually, he'll come back. Martin Jones probably fills in for him. 27 games last year, an .899 save percentage, a 2.96 goals against average, and 1 shutout. Look out for Brandon Tanev, of course. He missed a ton of last season and brings a lot of energy and physicality to this team. And lastly, will we see Shane Wright on this roster this upcoming season? He was the 4th overall draft pick in this last draft, even though he was supposed to be number 1 or at the worst number 2, coming off a 32-goal, 62-assist performance in 63 games with the Kingston Frontenacs. Our next team here is the Anaheim Ducks. So they were 22-37 in regulation this past year, 24th in goals for, 23rd in goals against, 14th on the power play, and 10th on the penalty kill. So relatively good special teams compared to 5-on-5 play. So first of all, with the Ducks, I want to say that Pat Verbeek has done an excellent job in terms of offloading some expendable veterans and also acquiring some draft picks. The future looks really bright for this team. Additionally, he brought in John Klingberg from the Dallas Stars. He can add a lot of productivity to the defense. So in 74 games, he had 6 goals and 41 assists. But if the Ducks aren't exactly competing for a playoff spot, this guy could be a very good trade deadline asset. They have great youth talent everywhere on this roster, including the likes of Trevor Zegras, 23 goals and 38 assists in his first season. Troy Terry is 25 years old, so he's got lots of great years ahead of him. 37 goals and 30 assists. Mason McTavish could crack the lineup day one for this club. The 3rd overall draft pick in last year's draft was outstanding in the World Juniors. I think he will be a future captain of this franchise. Defenseman Jamie Drysdale, 4 goals and 28 assists in his first full season as a 19-year-old. That is pretty impressive for a young defenseman. They also added Andrew Kopp and Frank Vetrano in free agency, both of whom played for the Rangers this past year. Kopp with 21 goals and 33 assists. Vetrano with 18 goals and 14 assists, so good middle six talents there. But really, if the Ducks want to get back into the postseason, I think they need a much stronger performance in net from the likes of John Gibson. Yes, Anthony Stolarz has been excellent so far in Anaheim, but Gibson can really be the straw that stirs the drink if he's actually healthy. He seems to be playing every year with some sort of ailment. This past year, 56 games, a .904 save percentage, a 3.19 goals against average, and a shutout. He hasn't finished in the top 10 for Vezina Trophy voting since 2018, but he still has some good years ahead of him if he is healthy. Now let's go to my team here, the San Jose Sharks. So just 1 point better than the Ducks, same regulation record, 30th in goals for, 21st in goals against average, 22nd on the power play, and 2nd on the penalty kill. Now the Sharks underwent a sort of facelift in the offseason, so they have a new general manager, Mike Greer, first-time GM. They have a new head coach in David Quinn, his only other head coaching job in the NHL being with the New York Rangers before Gerard Gallant eventually took over. They also lost Brent Burns in a trade with the Carolina Hurricanes to eventually gain some cap space from that. Keep your eye on Timo Meier. The 26-year-old is coming off a career-high 35 goals and 41 assists this past season. He's going to be a restricted free agent at the end of the season, has an interesting kind of qualification with his contract, right? Does this guy earn a fat paycheck, or is he going to be at a more modest kind of like $7.5 million deal? That is something to watch out for. Is he part of the franchise going forward? The Sharks have a couple of promising rookies on this team, including Thomas Bordeleau and William Eklund, both of whom could be either a center or a winger, and they're kind of among a crop of like 10 to 15 players who could compete for the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Season. Now, Bordeleau, point per game player at Michigan last year, plays with the Sharks in the final 8 games of the season and adds 5 assists, also scores that shootout goal against Vegas. And then William Eklund started last year with the Sharks. He had 4 assists in 9 games, but he didn't look acclimated to the NHL style of play. So hopefully this offseason has helped him out. Hopefully he's added some muscle as well. 2 more points I want to make here with the Sharks. Will they find a way to trade James Reimer, especially if they get the same performance out of him from last season? In order for somebody like Strauss-Mann to be called up to the roster, he had a great season in the SHL, the Swedish Professional League. He played for, I don't know which team, I didn't even write it down, but a .914 save percentage, a 2.19 goals against average, and 3 shutouts in just 22 games. And then lastly, will Ryan Merkley finally prove himself in a full season, assuming that he's healthy with the Sharks? He broke in a little bit last year for 39 games, but just a goal and 5 assists for a guy who's very creative offensively. We saw some flashes of brilliance from him last year, but it's about consistency with him. And it's really important because the Sharks' defensive prospect pool looks very thin right now. So the 22-year-old, 4 years after he's been drafted, this might be kind of a make or break season for him. Now we get to the Vancouver Canucks. So they were 32-30 in regulation, 18th in goals for, tied for 7th in goals against. They had the 9th best power play, but they were tied for 30th in penalty kill. This is just a typo on my end. First of all, will this team play like they did when Bruce Boudreau came in as the interim head coach this last year? 32, 15, and 10 with Boudreau, and as you saw, the defense was particularly strong for them. Second of all, now when you think of Canucks wingers, you might think of Brock Besser or maybe Connor Garland. Well, look for a couple of breakout performances from other guys. So first of all, Andrei Kuzmenko scored a goal in the preseason last night. Coming over from SKA St. Petersburg, he played 45 games there this past season, 20 goals and 33 assists, was a point per game player in the playoffs as well. And look for a step forward and more opportunity from Vasily Podkolzin, 10th overall draft pick in 2019. This past season with Vancouver, just 12 minutes and 48 seconds of time on ice for the young forward, but he had 14 goals and 12 assists. Third, did the Canucks actually have the best goaltending in the Pacific Division? Yes, hear me out. So Thatcher Demko, 64 games this past season, an absolute workhorse. A .915 save percentage, a 2.72 goals against average, and a shutout, and you guys have seen what he can do in the playoffs. I've been saying this for like over a year now. He will be a Vezina Trophy finalist this upcoming season. His backup will be Spencer Martin. He only appeared in 6 games with the Canucks last year, but check this out, guys. A .950 save percentage and a 1.74 goals against average. So if this guy can relieve Demko for about 25 games in the season, I think that you'll get prime performances from both of them potentially. And then lastly, will Quinn Hughes be in the Norris Trophy conversation? 8 goals and 60 assists in 76 games this past season, including 31 assists on the power play, just a wizard with distributing the puck. Now we get to the Vegas Golden Knights. They were 34 and 31 in regulation, 12th in goals for, tied for 14th in goals against, 25th on the power play, and 21st on the penalty kill. So the biggest story heading into this year was getting their players healthy. So check this out, guys. Mark Stone, Riley Smith, William Karlsson, and Alec Martinez, we all know these players fairly well. They combined to miss a total of 142 games this past season. And consider this, the team was still, as I mentioned earlier, 12th in goals for and tied for 14th in goals against. So despite missing some of their best players, they actually did fairly well. And not to mention, they'll get a full season of Jack Eichel. He played 34 games in Vegas this past year, 14 goals and 11 assists. They have a new head coach in Bruce Cassidy. So Cassidy made the playoffs in 6 straight seasons with the Boston Bruins and took them to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final in 2019. And as we saw earlier, Vegas not particularly good on special teams, but the Bruins under Cassidy were always particularly strong in both power play and penalty kill. Now, there's a bit of a question mark when it comes to goaltending with the Knights because Robin Lehner is going to be out for the full season, and we don't know exactly when Laurent Brossoit will be ready for NHL action. So they traded with the Sharks for Aiden Hill. He could be a pretty good kind of like 3rd string goaltender, or maybe 2nd string. He's got plenty of good years ahead potentially as a 25-year-old or 26-year-old. But they also have Logan Thompson, the AHL goaltender of the year in 2019. And in 19 games with Vegas, he was very good, especially in the shootout, right, guys? So a 914 save percentage, a 2.68 goals against average, and a shutout. But how will he do when he has to actually shoulder the bulk of the starts in net? And lastly, they lost Max Pacioretty in a trade to the Vegas Golden Knights to get below the cap ceiling, but they did a good job in terms of filling in with some productivity from the likes of Phil Kessel. He only had 8 goals this past season, but that was with Arizona. Also had 44 assists, so 52 points. Could be a strong middle 6 option for them. Now we get to the Los Angeles Kings. A strong season from them, 99 points to get back into the playoffs, 35 and 27 in regulation, 20th in goals for, tied for 9th in goals against average, 27th on the power play, and 22nd on the penalty kill. So, of course, the biggest story in the offseason for the Kings, the acquisition of Kevin Fiala from the Wild. Fiala played all 82 games and had 33 goals and 52 assists, so a career high 85 points. Hopefully, Fiala can help at least with maybe a second unit power play, 5 goals and 12 assists with the Wild this past season. The Kings did need some improvement in that category. Hopefully, they'll have a full season of Drew Doughty, who missed that playoff series against the Oilers. Had he played, who knows, maybe the Kings would have actually beaten the Oilers. So Doughty, 39 games, 7 goals, 24 assists, an absolute workhorse, 25 minutes and 44 seconds of time on ice. You also have some promising young defensemen for them as well. Sean Dursey filled in and added some offense in Doughty's absence this past season. And I like Mikey Anderson quite a bit, at least from the eye test in terms of defensive responsibility and physicality. Hopefully a couple of young players like Quinton Byfield and Arthur Kaliev can take a step forward for this team, because the Kings do look a lot stronger now in the top 6. So to get some secondary scoring from some players who are, far from their prime years would be fantastic for them. So Byfield, 40 games this past season. His rookie season had 5 goals and 5 assists, just over 12 minutes of time on ice. Same with Kaliev, about 12 and a half minutes of time on ice, but he had 14 goals and 13 assists, so maybe they get some more opportunity this year. And lastly, for the Kings, who's it going to be in net? So Jonathan Quick, a great kind of resurgence this past year, played 46 games, 910 save percentage, a 2.59 goals against average, and 2 shutouts. I thought he was pretty strong in the playoffs as well, but Cal Peterson wasn't himself this past season, and if he's able to get back to where he was maybe a season prior, yeah, this could be a pretty strong goaltending tandem. So 37 games played for Peterson, an .895 save percentage, a 2.89 goals against average, although he did have 3 shutouts, but he's been a bit banged up in the preseason, so hopefully Quick can at least shoulder the workload to start the year. Now let's get to the Edmonton Oilers, 104 points, including 38 and 27 in regulation, tied for 7th in goals for, 18th in goals against average, 3rd best power play, and 17th on the penalty kill. For the Oilers, don't forget Jay Woodcroft was the interim head coach last season. The team was 38, 26, and 9 with him behind the bench. They have a new goaltending tandem with the likes of Jack Campbell and Stuart Skinner. Stuart Skinner did fairly well for them in limited action this past season, certainly better than like Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith to an extent as well. Skinner, 13 games, a .913 save percentage, a 2.62 goals against average, and a shutout. And that's important because I expect Skinner to get a lot more starts this upcoming season. Campbell, the most he's ever played in his career is 49 with Toronto this past season, and he has been injured in the past as well. He did pretty well though. A .914 save percentage, a 2.64 goals against average, and he had 5 shutouts for the Leafs. Second of all, they extended Evander Kane in the offseason, and he was certainly a shot in the arm for this team, especially in the playoffs. So in 43 regular season games, had 22 goals and 17 assists, and in the playoffs, 13 goals and 4 assists in 15 games. They also extended Brett Kulak, who I thought was their best defender in the playoffs. I remember him playing pretty well with Evan Bouchard, and I do expect a big season from Evan Bouchard, as last season was kind of a breakout year for him. I really like the way that he can quarterback a power play as well. Put him on that first unit. So 81 games, 12 goals, and 31 assists for 43 points. Didn't even average 20 minutes of time on ice, so I do expect that to go up. And of course, with the Oilers, right, they're totally stacked with the likes of McDavid, Draisaitl, and they can add Evander Kane onto that line, or Draisaitl can center a second line. You still have other good weapons like Zach Hyman, who they brought in last year, who worked out well for them. And also you have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. He always seems to kind of fall in under the radar. But if they can get a little bit more out of a couple players like Kyler Yamamoto, like Jesse Puljujärvi, they brought in Matthias Janmark as well, somebody who could fit in on a third line, then yeah, this team could, at the worst, outscore any defensive problems that they have. And lastly, we get to the Calgary Flames. They were 44 and 21 in regulation, clearly the best mark in this division. 6th best in goals for, 3rd best in goals against, 10th best power play, and 6th best penalty kill, so great all around. It was definitely a huge offseason for the Calgary Flames, as Johnny Gaudreau left in free agency, Matthew Tkachuk gets traded over to the Panthers, and in comes Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau, in addition to Nazem Kadri signing in free agency. So with these moves, you can have Elias Lindholm still as your top line center, you have Nazem Kadri as your second line center, and then you also have Mikhail Backlund, so that's great 1-2-3 center depth. Then in terms of your top wingers, you have Jonathan Huberdeau, who had the same number of points as Johnny Gaudreau in 115. You have Andrew Mangiapane coming off a 35-goal season. You also have Tyler Toffoli, who can give you at least 20 goals. I expect a bit of a bounce back compared to last year. You could also have somebody like Blake Coleman, who adds a lot of intensity to a second line. You could maybe even bring in somebody like Jacob Peltier, who was selected 26th overall in 2019 and is coming off a great season with the Stockton Heat, now the Calgary Wranglers of the AHL. He had 62 points in 66 games. As for Weegar, I already mentioned earlier the Flames were 3rd in goals against average. I really think that Weegar, being kind of a dual threat as a defenseman, could have an excellent time in Daryl Sutter's system, especially if he pairs with somebody like Chris Tanev. So Weegar this past year, 8 goals and 36 assists, averaged 23 plus minutes of time on ice per game, finished 14th for the Norris Trophy as the best defenseman, and was 8th the prior season, and that's pretty good for a team that already had Aaron Ekblad. The goaltending should once again be a strength for the Calgary Flames, even though Markstrom definitely did have some stinkers and didn't play well in the second round. He was great in the first round against Dallas, I thought, and throughout the season. God, he led the league in shutouts, so you got him as your workhorse number one. And Dan Vladar, I think that he actually had a pretty good season as well. 23 games, a .906 save percentage, a 2.75 goals against average, and 2 shutouts. And finally, here is my outlook on the Pacific Division. These are not my final predictions. I'm going to make a video in just a couple of days for that, but let me know your predictions down in the comments down below. So I separated this division in 3 groups, right? Division contenders, wildcard contenders, and also teams that won't make the playoffs. We'll start with the teams that I don't expect to make the playoffs. The first of whom, the San Jose Sharks. They got worse in the offseason. They moved Burns. They signed a lot of kind of like fringe NHL players. They don't have a lot of bona fide starters in the top 6. The goaltending is decent for them. The defensive depth is certainly lacking. This is going to be at the start of a true rebuild for the Sharks, even though they've missed the postseason the past 3 years. This team has a long road ahead of them. Next up, I'll talk about the Anaheim Ducks. I was really tempted to actually consider them as a wildcard contender. They were great for the first half of this past year. However, they're still pretty young in a number of positions. I don't know exactly what we'll get out of John Gibson this upcoming season. I just don't think that they have enough proven veteran talent, even though they did add the likes of Strome and Klingberg and also Vetrano. But in terms of like actually having so much impact where this team is in the playoff picture 40 or 50 games into the season, I still don't see it just yet. But again, this is a team that could, or a franchise that could dominate the division later in the decade. I certainly do believe that. And lastly, the Seattle Kraken. I actually last year foolishly predicted them to finish second place in the Pacific because I was loving their selections for goaltending. But that was maybe their biggest Achilles heel this past season. So I hope that this new goaltending coach helps Drieger and also Grubauer bounce back. The defensive talent is just fine for them, in my opinion. And they did bolster the forward group quite a bit with the likes of Andrei Burakovsky, though I don't think he's going to put up the same numbers as he did in Colorado. And Oliver Bjorkstrand could be a great deal as well. Now we get to the playoff contenders. I have 3 teams here, separate from the division contenders. So one of these teams would actually make it to the postseason because you do have 3 teams at the minimum. And I do think that the Pacific getting stronger in the offseason, I think they'll send 4 teams to the playoffs. At least that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. So first of all, Vegas. You know, this is a team that just 2 seasons before now was in the conference final in back-to-back years. Players are healthy again. The top 6 looks pretty scary. I like the Phil Kessel edition. The defensive group was excellent with Peter DeBoer at the helm, and they should be with Bruce Cassidy. That's all you got with the Boston Bruins when he was head coach, was great goaltending. If this guy Logan Thompson plays like that AHL goaltender of the year for 50 games, then yeah, this team could definitely be back in the postseason. Vancouver Canucks. They also have a very strong forward group. They have a Norris Trophy caliber puck mover on the blue line in Quinn Hughes. The goaltending could be fantastic for them as well. And the Bruce Boudreau effect, it could be a real thing for them for a full 82 games. And lastly, the LA Kings. They were in the playoffs this past season. I could see them at the least finishing 4th in this division. They're getting stronger in the forward group, especially with Kevin Fiala. What if we get a step forward from Byfield and Turcotte? Adrian Kempe is a 35-goal scorer now. And in goal, if Cal Peterson can match Jonathan Quick from last year, yeah, this team could be pretty scary. And then lastly, I think we still have just 2 division contenders right now. Maybe this changes next season, but for right now, Calgary, right? I think that you could argue they got stronger in the offseason despite losing Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk, bringing in Jonathan Huberdeau, an elite playmaker in his own right, in addition to Mackenzie Weegar to add some productivity on defense. They still have great goaltending. And you've got the Edmonton Oilers, right? Maybe the 2 best forwards in the NHL, or 2 of the best 3 or 4. McDavid, Draisaitl, Kane. We'll see. We'll see if he can stay out of trouble. But I like the addition of Jack Campbell. And if Stuart Skinner plays like he did last season, then they have a pretty good goaltending tandem as well, in addition to a good offensive blue liner in the likes of Evan Bouchard. Anyway, guys, what are your Pacific Division standings? Make sure to comment down below and watch my other division previews. If you enjoyed content like this, become a member and support the channel as we grow through 5,000 subscribers and beyond. It's going to be a wonderful season. Next up on this channel is my season predictions video, so don't miss out. hit the notification bell, hit the thumbs up, guys. That helps others like yourselves discover our channel. And you can see the video description down below if you want to purchase some merchandise or follow me on social media. All right, Twisters. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this one. I'm Nick. I'll catch you later. Ciao.